Welcome to our Utilities Committee meeting, and the TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district, and today are located on Secwepemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnerships that we have with Secwepemc and respect the territory and the land on which we gather today. Do we have any additions or deletions from the agenda? Nothing, seeing none, we'll move on to the minutes. I'm gonna get someone to move the minutes of our last meeting. Right, moved by Yusuf, second by Director Thorpe, sorry, Director Sow. I'm ready. What if I don't remember your last names? Okay, so the minutes are moved, so we will, let's see. What do I do? Sorry.
Vice Chair.
Oh, yeah.
Call for all in favor and all against.
Okay, all in favor? Seeing all in favor, anyone against? Okay. Approved? Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to reports. So we have item 5.1, which is an operations update. Perfect.
Hey. Good morning, everybody. So we have an operations update for basically what happened this summer. Pretty exciting stuff. Some staffing updates, operational highlights, and then some what's next cover. So staffing update, just want to go over the structure of our utility services department. So we have myself, manager of utilities, and then utility supervisor. We have 3 utility operators, 1 utility technician, and casual utility technicians as well. So the 4 full-time operators, technicians, plus the casuals look after all of our water systems. Just want to remind you that we are a fairly small department, so any staffing adjustments have pretty significant impacts on us. So we have a new utility supervisor here, Quinn Smith. He joined us as a utility operator back in early May. So we had a vacancy in our technician role. We hired Quinn. He was a successful candidate for the utility operator role. And we had pretty good idea that within 3 to 5 years, he'd become a utility supervisor here. But we're 3 to 5 months later. So we had Mick Horton. He was at the last utility committee meeting. That was his second last day with us. He left to a different job anyways, elsewhere. Left this position vacant. So we did a search and promoted Quinn to utility supervisor back in July 29th. So we were basically a month and a half without a supervisor in the department. At the same time, of our 3 operators, one of them has gone off on short-term disability as of the end of May and is expected to return the end of October. So not only were we down a supervisor role, once we filled that supervisor role, now we're down 2 operators. Tons of fun. So of our 4 operators, we have 2, Darren and Dale, and they're still at it. However, they do appreciate taking vacation. So we did bring a summer student in as a casual because one of our other casuals decided to do a cross-Canada trip this summer. It was not available for Diggs and Savannah or Blue River even because he was in New Brunswick. So more stress on our department for our staffing. We do also have 4 contract operators or positions. And so in Blue River, we had a retirement, Mr. Terdiak, and that was filled back in June, I believe. In Vavenby, we're all good there, still going strong in Vavenby with our contract operator, who also happens to be the fire chief there. So that's we're pretty fortunate with that. Spence's Bridge, we still have an opening for a contract position there. However, we've been unsuccessful in filling that. So we have been using our casual operators to cover that position. And Loon Lake, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with our contract operator in Loon Lake, but Mr. Midgley I'd say, I was thinking like decades, but he's like almost a century of experience. Very knowledgeable person, amazing to work with. And I know when I started 6.5 years ago, he was like, hey, I'm gonna be retiring, you need to find a replacement. That was 6.5 years ago, he's still going strong. He was actually in yesterday, and we're gonna call it a pending retirement. He's ready to go do other stuff and is also trying to find a replacement for himself up there, which is unsuccessful. He said basically everyone who he's thought of as a replacement is now somewhere else waiting for him. So basically it's difficult there. So we're covering that with our internal staff until we can find a solution. So with that, we posted for a new utility technician. We found 2 good candidates, and we offered the full-time permanent position that was open with Quinn being promoted to one of them. And we've offered a temporary full-time position to another because of the 2 operators we currently have here today. They're doing a dig out in Savannah. One of them is expected to retire in September. So we're getting a fairly significant turnover in our department right now. Which when we get into the presentation with the capital and further with operations will be like, well, you have all this money now with these rate increases and whatnot. Why aren't we spending it? It's like, don't have the people. When we take 2 people out of our department, it's pretty challenging just to cover day-to-day and on call. So we have 24/7 coverage for on call for emergencies. And when you have 2 people doing that rotation, it gets pretty long and pretty challenging. So that's, I think, covers our staffing updates. So yeah, I think if you have any questions
Thank you
about
for
that.
that. Yeah, I just see Director Smith has a question.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know what avenues you explore when you're looking for these contract people. Like where is this pool, or where would you be looking for these people?
Yeah, so when we're looking for the contract, we posted as a RFI, or basically is a contract position or like we would with any contractor. And we'll post it on our website first of all, and then we'll try and share it through social media, through some of the local contacts. So for Blue River, for instance, we had we had 3 or 4 people put their name in for it. In Vavenby, we had, I think, 2 when we did that. In Spence's Bridge, we had 0. In Loon Lake, Mr. Midgley is talked to a few people. A lot of that area, it seems like the Gold Rush Trail or whatever is fairly word of mouth, and kind of, Cache Creek, Ashcroft, some of those areas where it's just trying to get it out there with social media and with boots on the ground, basically. So
Yeah, because like there's a Work BC office in 100 Mile. I mean, I don't know whether a guy would come all the way from that far away, but you'd have to really shake the bushes, I think, to find somebody up there. But I wouldn't be surprised if there would be somebody that would do it. I mean, you do have to have some credentials though, do you not?
yes, so we do expect that the contractor would have their small water system certification. And we will work with the contractor to help them get that as well. So.
And if I could add in, as you know, we tight budgets on all these systems. So really the contractor model is designed around, you know, finding a local person who's willing to do it kind of as a side gig. I'm sure we could find companies based in Kamloops or Williams Lake that would come out and contract, do this work, but the cost would just be through the roof. So we're finding that model maybe is not going to work in other places. And to Tyrone's comment about the temporary position we've been able to fill, we'll be able to do that in-house as needed. So it's not that much of a panic in that Spencer Bridge area because we have the extra body. And just to kind of maybe wrap up with Tyrone's point about being short-staffed, just to reiterate that the good news is that on October 14th, when these 2 new positions start, we'll be back at full capacity in the department. But it's been a rough up and down year in terms of filling those positions.
So is Al, just the last point, is he still servicing Loon Lake property, or is he just getting to it when he gets to it? Last
Nope.
time I talked to him, he was kind of,
Al's still servicing Loon Lake. He's planning on flushing next week.
Okay.
He was in to get some reagents yesterday. Quinn's worked with him to replace a couple hypo pumps up there. So yeah, he is. And we just had a chat, like the most difficult part for us out of the Mission Flats office is to do that routine sampling and be committed to going to Loon Lake every Tuesday. That's challenging. We already have made that commitment to Spence's Bridge and working with Cook's Ferry with our partners there to cover that. It's a little bit easier with Spence's Bridge because we have the shared use agreement with Cook's Ferry. So there are local people available there from Cook's Ferry to deal with emergencies, but Loon Lake itself is challenging. So the discussion with Al has been if he can continue with the routine sampling and he needs assistance with the flushing, with any repairs, things like that, just give us a call and we'll send guys up. So we have a heater to replace there. It's 12, 14 years old, needs to be changed out. So we'll coordinate the electrician and one of our guys to get up there and get access and change it. So Al doesn't need to worry about that. Yeah. And yeah, I guess the other piece is that a lot of the work that we do is digging, and these staffing issues came up during our non-freezing season. So it's kind of put us behind, I'd say 6 months or so for some of the work that we can get to. When we do become fully staffed in, October 15th after Thanksgiving, there's going to be a training period for the new hires. We'll expect our other operator to return from the short term. And then we'll be fully staffed and the ground will be frozen. So don't worry, we have plenty of other stuff to keep everyone busy, but we've kind of missed that. For instance, the Blue River water main replacement, we just didn't have the manpower this year to get to that. It's on our 5-year capital plan. So, but I'll cover that in the next piece. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Quinn Smith to carry on.
I just see we have one more question from Director Sell.
Yeah,
Coming from what you just said, do you think we should bring it to the board for support and further seasonal headcount, like in the summer months for holidays and such coverage? I was going to ask for some examples. So like Blue River water main replacements, that's the result of short staffing. Thank you.
Yeah, so as far as the staffing and the headcounts go, with utilities, our budgets, the service area has to cover the cost of the additional labor. And with the short term, we do recover wages from that. So we are applying that and a potential and reduction in the contract amounts for Spence's Bridge to bring in a temporary full-time operator or technician that will potentially replace our retiree in September. But that reduces the amount of budget we have available to apply to casuals or a summer student, for instance. So it's not a matter of the general taxation being able to accommodate another body, because an admin assistant would be great, but with the way utilities is funded, we can't do that. So Quinn and I get to deal with the admin as well as the hands-on stuff. So we are pretty much maximizing what we can with trying to get some succession planning through and keeping the manpower that we need. With a 4-person rotation on the standby, it works great. It's once every 4 weeks you're on call, and they pretty much rotate long weekends. So every 4th long weekend, someone's on. So in the summer, like it's a pretty good break that way. It works with 4. It's when 2 people are gone right away, and one of them was my own fault for promoting them. Sorry. Right, when you take 2 people out of that 4-person pool, that makes it really hard, really hard. But that I think was short-term pain right there. Just happened this summer for us. So. All right, I'll give it over to Quinn Quinn Smith for the remainder of this. There you go.
Thanks, Tyrone. As these guys have reiterated, it was a bit of a game of musical chairs in our department the last few months. Looking forward to the dust settling and kind of starting to get into some bigger jobs, but I'll just give you a bit of an update on what we got accomplished over the last few months here. Black Pines, no news is good news in Black Pines right now. We did a little bit of hydrant flushing to clear the system a little bit. We had some chlorine analyzer problems that I dealt with. I talked to the vendor on the phone the other day and we had to rewire some things and now it's reading properly. And now we have chlorine analyzers that we're going to be installing into every system from this one company. So now I have at least a direct contact to him if we have any other issues down the road. Moving on to Savannah here. Picture on the left is 6289 Savannah Access Road. We had to put a meter pit and a new service in. We dug across the road underground to get to the water main, and we had to do some directional drilling underneath the road to connect to the water main. Yeah, it was a few days, 2 or 3 day job. Hooked everything up. They had to go back a few days later to do some more fill and compaction because it kind of settled in a bit, but that one got done and done well. The flooding in July, in Savannah, we had no issues with our systems, our water systems. We had an operator on call. He went out there for the weekend to just do a drive around and do a check. The water systems weren't affected. The picture on the right is our driveway up to the reservoir in the hills behind Savannah. It got washed out quite a bit. We had to send a contractor up there with his excavator and kind of flatten the road out and do a job on that. Right now, actually, as we speak, there's a crew, one of our casuals and one of our operators are in Savannah working on a leak repair with a hydrovac company, just checking the service in the front yard. Just some smaller systems. Del Oro is running fine. There's no issues there. Just our standard meter reads and sampling. Evergreen is generally working great. To the river, one of the river pumps was faulty. We're looking into purchasing another pump for the river. Currently running on 1 pump there. Little Fort, we're assisting the community services with that area. We had to send an operator up for some pump maintenance on the chlorine system. Blue River, no issues. The new generator, there's a few power outages throughout the area. Last couple months, there's been no issues with that. Moving on here. Loon Lake, like we talked about, Al's out there. I met him a few times. Swapped a chlorine pump, a new one off the shelf for him. We talked about reservoir cleaning yesterday. Just kind of a manpower thing right now. Maybe get to that down the line here. Maple Mission, the pictures on the slide there. On the left-hand side, we had a leak in someone's driveway on the weekend. There's an adapter in the red circle there that when the pump, that's the wellhead pump, when it was running, it was pouring water out and running down a gentleman's driveway. So we got a call, sent an operator out there. He shut the system down, and then we sent the crew out on Monday to do a dig and fix on the right there. We put all new piping and all new adapter and got that running. Everything's been fine there, no leaks, no nothing. So that was a good job by the crew. Spence's Bridge, mid-July, we had a bit of an issue. We noticed that our reservoir levels were dropping, and then overnight, the reservoirs weren't recuperating or filling as much as we would have liked, so we were kind of losing ground. We sent out a water conservation notice to the community to stop watering and save as much water as we could. We went out there, did a little door-to-door PR work and handing out some flyers and letting everybody know what was going on. That seemed to help. The water levels came back. We found a few more leaks that we had to kind of go around and find some hoses and some water draining that we had to turn off to help with that. And then we managed to pinpoint our issues to the well level sensors at the pump house. We did some switching around of some well level sensors and realized that it wasn't reading properly. So we got the proper level sensor in there, and then a couple of days later, we sent our engineering crew and installed some new level sensors throughout the system, and everything came back to normal, and we managed to take the conservation notice off and just put our regular watering restrictions. So it's a few days of kind of troubleshooting and figuring things out, but it worked out well. Vavenby, Wallachine and Pritchard is all kind of standard. There's not much going on there. Chlorine pump rebuild in Wallachine, the filters are fine, but nothing to report really for those communities. Wastewater side of things. Paul Lake, it's in good order. There's no issues there. We just finished our sludge pumping campaign for the people's, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, septic tank, sorry. That's the fifth year out of 5, so the cycle's complete. Now we're gonna kind of go back to the original addresses and start that again. We're prepping. The picture on the left is the new RBC that's up there waiting to get installed. We're just preparing for that. Weather dependent and resource dependent. There's been lots of power outages up at Paul Lake. They've been doing a lot of power pole work and stuff along the main road. Our generator's been fine. Everything's been running normal when any issues like that have occurred. We demoed an old tank. I don't know if you can see in the back left, there's an old tank that operator went up for a few days and got rid of that. Pritchard wastewater. System's in pretty good shape for what our operator out there has got to deal with. We had a few wastewater lift station. The picture on the right's the lift station by the river in Pritchard. We had some valving problems. We had to do a confined space. I had to go in there and wrench on some valves and get things moving, and we managed to fix that, but then that caused an issue at the actual treatment plant. So we had to bring an hydrovac truck and try and get some rocks out of some lines, and there seems to be a bit of an issue of some rock and dirt and debris getting into that system. But it's running fine now. General summertime mowing and upkeep throughout Pritchard, and this winter we're going to be doing a UV system cleaning. That's it for now. What's next coming up? We have complete our yearly samples as normal, just keep that operation going. Hydrant flushing in the falls to kind of clear the lines up. As I mentioned, we have analyzers to install throughout the system, so we're going to have a standard analyzer for everybody. It will be nice. Warehouse restocking and just getting our new employees trained and up to speed so we can get that full crew going. Sewer system, want to do a little bit of a clean out. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of rock and debris in that system, so we're going to do a clean of the lift station and some of the lines. Changing out the RBC as we mentioned as well. Yearly pumping campaign is completed, and our UV system cleaning coming up. That's all we got for now. Questions?
Okay, I see a few questions. We have Director Grenier, Sao, and Houghton. So we'll start with Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. On the Savanaw system, the flood event, my recollection was that there was a fund available to the TNRD to repair things that happened in that flood event. And I'm just wondering, when the picture of the road came up and anything else that was going on, whether we've made application to recover some of those costs, if that's something that we can apply for.
The, the Reservoir Road and that work was completed under an EAF through the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, as well as inspecting the potentially impacted water meter pits. Those were also there was a contractor hired through the EOC to complete all that work as well, so.
So if
Where-
I can clarify that. So the answer is yes, that was provincially funded. So it's through, when we do action through the Emergency Operations Center, we submit, what's called an EAF expense authorization form, which means we can do emergency works and then we bill all of that work back to the province under the emergency program. So all those repairs and work happened under that emergency. The other fund you're probably referring to is disaster financial assistance that local governments are eligible for after an event to do repairs. But all of these repairs and work we were able to do right during, essentially in immediate response to the emergency. If under a scenario, I guess to add to that, under a scenario, if there was significant damage to the system from the emergency event, then we would have applied through DFA, disaster financial assistance, to do whatever major repairs were required. But these ones were somewhat minor and we could do them immediately under the emergency funding that was immediately available.
Okay, thank you for that. Director Sao.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, can I get more information about the yearly pump outs of the septic? Is that like a service establishment for, and how many EAs have them? And I'm on a septic system and I have to go and pay somebody to do that. I'm assuming if there's a scale there for an entire community to do it through the TNRD, I guess there's cost savings.
So the Paul Lake wastewater system, they all started off with individual septic tanks, and then the TNRD built the sewage treatment plant there that collects the effluent from the septic tanks rather than going to a disposal field. As part of that service establishment, the maintenance of the septic tank itself became the responsibility of the TNRD. So we are responsible for pumping out that septic tank. We are not responsible for replacing it or for unplugging their sewer lines or anything. It's just that septic tank for each of the parcels on Paul Lake. We look after the sludge removal from, and it used to be an annual, not every 5 years, we go through and do every single tank. However, costs have gone up and the impact on the sewage system from pumping all the solids out of each tank make for very unhappy bugs, let's say. When you take all their food away for a week, it causes process upsets. So we decided to go on a 5-year rotation to fit it into a annual budget. So I think the intent of it was that the TNRD pumping 110 septic tanks would get a better price than each individual homeowner calling a septic tank company to come clean their tank. However, our parcel tax and user fees up there do account for those costs. So each individual parcel does pay into the utility, into the Paul Lake sewer system, and part of that budget includes a line item for septic tank pumping. So they are paying for it.
Thank you for that. So my question is, it's more like a one-off because of Paul Lake's arrangement. It's not necessarily that, hey, can I get something like that for Blackpool? And
No, it's a good question, and short answer is no. We wouldn't do this somewhere else that's on septic because these properties aren't really, like, they have septic tanks, but then the effluent from the tanks is going into our treatment plant. So the history of this, and Tyrone will fill in the blanks or correct me if I'm wrong, the history of this was that there was no septic service. There was no TNRD sewer treatment plant in Paul Lake. They were all on individual septic systems, which were causing a whole bunch of problems, especially because they're right on the shore of the lake. And so the service was established that then essentially connected to each of those septic tanks to pipe it to our treatment plant and treat this sewage properly. So as part of that service establishment was this funding that's included in the service to pay for pumping out the tanks because the tanks weren't removed. So it's a weird system because the tanks were already in place and then we added the treatment plant.
Yeah, I'd like to just add one little thing to that. It is the design of it with the septic tanks draining into the sewer system means that the solids stay behind in the septic tanks. This means that your treatment process, you don't have to deal with the solids later on down the road like we'd have to in Pritchard, for instance, where everything gets flushed down the toilet directly into the sewer and then ends up in the plant. You have to deal with the solids. The solids are dealt with by the septic tank or held there essentially and removed from our treatment process so that it actually makes it a fair bit more efficient for us as far as that plant. Like to compare it to Pritchard, we have an operator in Pritchard 5 days a week. We go for half a day in Paul Lake a week. So just, a couple of differences like that. It was a pretty interesting idea, and it's not super unusual to see a step or a stag system, which would be septic tank, effluent pumped, or gravity. So different types of designs for sewer systems, but this one worked well for that community. Like Jamie said, they were basically draining into rock directly into a lake before, so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Director Houghton and then Director Morris.
Thank you. Quinn, welcome to your new role, and thank you for taking that on. This is a two-parter. I think it's fairly easy. The Del Oro system, which has, I believe, 43 hookups. How were we this year for the quantity of water supplied to service that subdivision and the quality of the water? I know the river level, I believe, was better this year, and I know they've complained to me before about the quality. So how are we in 2024?
Yeah, I can't really date myself back to know what the quality has been in the last few years, just because I'm rather new to the TNRD. But I worked for the city at the Water Quality Center here, and I know, yeah, for the last few years, the river level was pretty good this year. And from the turbidity that I saw from the time that I started, it never got too high through Del Oro. There was quite a bit of usage out there just because all the yards and yeah, it's pretty good lots out there. But yeah, from what I can say, water quality was pretty good and the water usage was pretty high. Yeah.
I got one more. Where do we stand on the updates, the major updates to the Pritchard wastewater and the Pritchard water system that we approved? Is that coming?
Director Morris.
We need this apparently. Thank you. I hope just a couple of quick questions. Both of which are probably based on the fact that my knowledge level is clearly nowhere near you folks. I just happen to have the system. So Black Pines, you mentioned coriander system, and that there is an update still required or needs a fix, or have I heard that incorrectly?
Sorry, you may have heard it incorrectly, but it was a chlorine analyzer.
Okay, there we go.
Yes. So that measures the what's left of the chlorine in the system after we chlorinate.
Okay.
And that Quinn just worked with the vendor and their technical support this past week to get sorted out. So
Okay.
that's all corrected now.
So generally the sense there is that we're solid, we're good.
Oh yeah, no news is
Pardon
good
the
news.
term.
Black Pines, it's great.
Okay, then the second one, the details vis-a-vis the Pritchard system. one question, you mentioned a new UV system. So that, I assume is solving, maybe you can just tell me that, just in case I get asked when I'm at the beach.
Sorry, it wasn't a new UV system. It was cleaning the UV system, and that's applies to the wastewater side.
Okay,
So we do not have UV on the water side. We have UV on the wastewater side, and the next steps on our work plan for the remainder of the year is to do a cleaning of that system.
okay.
Which is change out the lamps and clean the sleeves to remove any buildup so they are still as effective as they are required to be.
Okay. And then there were a couple other questions relative to Pritchard, but I think the bigger picture are, again, just a reminder, are there any other big projects outside of connectivity to developments and that kind of, are there any other things that we're anticipating that are sitting out there as a concern, potentially longer term?
Bigger issues for Pritchard, besides a water treatment facility and a new wastewater treatment facility. The other concerns we would have would be just the distribution infrastructure that's aging. And that's all in our capital plan anyways, to replace water mains and sewer mains. So when we looked at the setting the water rates and those reports and the infrastructure deficits, it factored in that, yes, we are replacing our treatment process in the Pritchard wastewater system, which accounts for maybe 50% of the value of that system. The other 50% would be the lift station that Quinn spoke about that we had some issues with earlier, and the collection mains that are running underneath the boulevards throughout the community. Those are also aging, so those will have to be replaced at some point, and we need to put money aside for that. So that's kind of longer term. Same with the water mains. We have some new water mains in Pritchard, mainly the line that goes to the reservoir and feeds the reservoir, or is a dedicated feed to the reservoir. We'll be tying into that line to tie in the new water treatment facility, which the water treatment facility replaces the existing one. Significantly more money for the new water treatment facility, but that asset itself is renewed. The water mains that distribute the water from the reservoir, including the reservoir to the users, the customers, those will also need to be replaced. Those are aging as well. So those are the hidden assets that no one sees, but notice when they break. And we would like to, in the case of Blue River, the water main replacement, that water main hasn't failed yet. However, parts of it have indicated that it's due to fail. And that's why we have it in our capital plan to replace that piece. And that's what we didn't get to this year. It doesn't mean that it's failed because we haven't fixed it this year. It could, hopefully doesn't fail before we replace it, but we're trying to get ahead on some of those ones. So Pritchard, same idea. I want to say in 2019, we replaced all the mainline valves in Pritchard so we can isolate each section of that distribution system, because the mainline valves were corroded and had failed. So we are doing that work as well. Do we need to change out, 200 meters of pipe right now? No, but in 20, 30, 40 years, whatever your crystal ball tells you, we will. So.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Quinn, I'd just like to say on behalf of the Utilities Committee, as well as the larger Board of Directors, welcome and thank you very much for your fulsome and articulate report. It's appreciated. We'll move on now to item 5.2, the capital update.
Feel like I'm going to do more talking today. So here's our capital projects update. So as I was prepping Quinn for his first utilities committee meeting and telling him it's not as scary as intimidating as it seems. I think the operations update is going to be where some of the more interesting stuff is going to be, because on our capital side, we do have these big dollar items, but they're pretty slow moving. relative to, hey, a water main or a well head broke, or this happened out in the field that we do day to day that we kind of take for granted, like, hey, that's what we do. But you guys see a well broke in Maple Mission and it's like, oh, cool. Okay. So yeah, for our capital projects, we'll go through our summary, current project updates, and then our future projects. So we have 3 main capital projects ongoing that we have received funding for. So we have our Pritchard Community Water System water treatment facility. This is through the ICIP, or Rural and Northern Communities Fund. Then we have the Growing Communities Fund and Canada Community Building Fund for conversion of the Pritchard Community Sewer Treatment Facility to a membrane bioreactor. That's our wastewater plant in Pritchard. So that's the Growing Communities and the formerly Gas Tax Fund. Also, so many acronyms for these things, but I think CWF, or Community Works Fund, is also part of the CCBF. So you'll see on the table the different acronyms and the funding sources. And then we have the Canada Community Building Fund for an automatic transfer switch at Loon Lake. Some other funding sources and projects that we have, these aren't so much capital, but I wanted to put them in here because they do, I guess, direct our capital spending and requests. So we have the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. This is our drought risk and infrastructure resiliency assessment for all of our community water systems. And then we have 2 infrastructure planning grants. These are small dollars, but they, one of them is to, forgot to mention it, Quinn, to maybe turn his cell off, but one is a feasibility study to convert Evergreen Community Water System to groundwater, and the other one is for a feasibility study to add a bottled water fill station in Loon Lake. So here's our table with some highlights, the status highlights, the funding amounts, the project budgets, and the different names of these things. So this is here for basically a quick review later, summary for you guys when you get asked. I'll go into each of these in detail next. So starting off with our membrane filtration plant in Pritchard, we have design is complete, submitted to IHA for the construction permit, and there's question and answers with IHA ongoing to finalize that construction permit. Since June, since our last meeting, we have reviewed the drafted NRFP, or negotiated request for proposal. And then the drawing package has been completed, and the NRFP. So this is our procurement for our essentially what you'd normally hear as a tender. We're doing a slightly different process, but the tender was posted on August 22nd. Closes today. So we'll have some news for you guys next meeting. Fingers crossed, especially from the guy behind me. Who we'll introduce a little later. Yeah, so this went up on the, yes.
We just have a question from Director Grenier.
How many bidders did you have on that project?
We do not know yet. It closes today.
Oh, so
At the
you
end
don't,
end of day today, it closed at 2 p.m.
okay.
So
How many packages got sent out?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, so for this, the point of contact was True Consulting. They stick handle the whole process for us. So when I say drafted the NRFP, I did not draft the NRFP. I reviewed it. Jamie and I reviewed it. And I did not complete a drawing package. That was our consultant. So, and the consultant posted the NRFP and is dealing with the addenda and answering the questions that come in from the bidders or potential bidders. And they will also provide a recommendation once all the responses come in. So it's kind of where we're at. And that's why I say that these are not super exciting. It's a big ticket item, but it's okay. Since June, what do? We posted a tender and waiting for it to close. Right? Not super exciting stuff, but it's getting there. One step further along. Our Pritchard Community Sewer System. So again, my formatting is odd on here, but we have a $2.15 million budget back from July 2023. So the design is partially complete. And when I say partially, I mean that we require our technology to select the technology, which membrane vendor to go with, to finalize the design so that our consultant can work that system into it. Membrane procurement was posted back in June 2024, I believe around the same time as our last meeting. And we're currently in negotiations with the preferred proponent for the supply of this. So this is again another negotiated piece where we had some responses on this and we narrowed it down to a couple and are negotiating with the top choice to kind of make sure that we check all the boxes on this one. So that is where that one's at. Loon Lake. So the board approved $18,000 in CCBF for automatic transfer switch in Loon Lake. That was a few months after we had the funding approved for all of the other utility systems, which have been completed. So this one, the timing was terrible. We got into procurement delays through COVID and stuff where these transfer switches we purchased for our other utilities were 6 weeks away. For Loon Lake, we were looking at 6 to 18 months, pretty lengthy times. And in the meantime, we kind of put it on hold and are looking at other options. And we have this planning grant now for a bottled water fill station, which I'll talk about in a couple moments. So basically what we're thinking is that this project is on hold and we need to have further discussions with the area director for this and what we'd like to do up there. So I'm just going to throw that on there for you.
Well, the area director just put it on hold.
No, sorry. No, it's not the area director that put it on hold. Staff's recommending we put it on hold and have further discussions with our area director to see if there's better use of that funding. I have my moments. All right, we have our CPF grant. So this is our drought resiliency, drought risk and infrastructure resiliency. I don't know who named this stuff, but we're basically looking at the potential impacts of drought on our water system. So all the required field work is complete and initial groundwater system analysis has been completed. And I threw this graph up here. This looks at the Maple Mission groundwater well. We have a single well there and this shows the groundwater levels on that well for the last 4 years. So not including this year. And just shows a trend over time. This is the kind of data that we're looking at for these in longer term to see what our quantity and ability to supply water is. So the surface water hydrological analysis has been completed and the preliminary results show that basically our earlier snow melts are shifting are resulting in our low water periods shifting and results in slightly higher surface water levels. So we're not getting these larger dips like the South Thompson isn't going as low because the snow is melting earlier. So it's pushing that low point back, which is actually at a higher level on the scale, if you can think of it that way. So climate change is driving these earlier snow melts, and this is preliminary results right now. We'll have a full report on this a little later. The next steps are to work with our consultant to review the operational challenges that we have, that Quinn and I and our staff are experiencing, review the summer and fall water levels and the predictions, as well as look at our water licensing. So once they figure out what's going on with our groundwater levels and our supply and our surface water availability, we need to look at how much water we are using, how much water we require, and how much water we're licensed for. So this is going to look at all the risks we have. And we'll I'm expecting to generate a few more capital projects out of this. So identify some more risks that we should probably address. So preparing for the future, the planning grants, these were in the future section a few meetings ago. They are in the current section now. So this is Evergreen. This is our smallest water system, 16 users. We have access issues to our intake. Our intake is on the lower right-hand side of the screen there on the bank of the North Thompson, and has a railway and a highway between it and our community water system, as well as a parcel of private property that's not within our community water system and not connected. So it has some access issues. So we're looking at converting to groundwater. So I had to rotate this map, but if I can see over here, in this area here, there's a groundwater well. And then we spoke with another resident there who has a parcel over here where may be potential groundwater. So there's, the high level work's been done, but there's a old like valley canyon that runs through here and another one that runs through this area and kind of keeps this piece here. There's groundwater here and potential groundwater here. We're basically at high level right now of where to predict any groundwater would be. So we're trying to get practice throwing darts before we throw one. And see check this, the nearby well and the water supply, pumping capacity, the water quality, and the details of that well to see if it would be feasible to start looking for groundwater in that community. Loon Lake Water Filling Station, this is in progress. So we completed a site visit up there and took some water samples and did some analyses on those. So essentially what we found is that we will need dedicated iron and manganese removal. So something like a green sand filter to remove the iron and manganese from the water. It's dissolved in the chlorine that's injected with it, doesn't provide enough time to precipitate it before really so that we could deal with it in the building, existing building. So option one of adding our treatment within the existing building has been ruled out. So this is what our feasibility or our planning grant is going to propose, is that we have our intake in the center here. And that building, we're not going to be able to shoehorn a treatment system that's effective into that building. There's a parcel, TNRD parcel here, that has 2 water mains along it and is right across the street from our existing intake, that we could potentially put a small building and the treatment process in for the bottled water fill station, which would provide some synergies with other departments' potential projects as well. So that's where the Loon Lake project is at, and this is why we'd also like to put that automatic transfer switch on hold, because a separate building may require have different power requirements and whatnot. And there might be 2 hydro services, things like that, where we want to make sure that we don't want to go spend $20,000 or $15,000 on a transfer switch that will be great for 6 months and then obsolete after that. And when we have yet in 6 years had to put a generator in Loon Lake to keep the system up and running. So those are the kind of discussions we want to have a little bit later about this. So future projects. One right now. All those other ones are, yeah, there's lots more, but the one on the books right now is the Wallachine Reservoir. So we completed an options assessment last year and decided that storing treated water versus raw water will eliminate some hazards. So we've identified a location for this. This is our current building. So this is where the water comes down from the reservoir and then gets treated through this little building here. Now, this site is also TNRD property and has a small garage on it. And there's 2 parcels here. And so this is a site we've identified, not necessarily right on it, but on this parcel where we've identified to put a reservoir. So the water will come from the pump station and reservoir, or current raw water reservoir, get treated through the treatment building, the existing treatment building, and stored in a treated water reservoir on the parcel adjacent to our treatment building. This, I shouldn't say obviously, but obviously a reservoir at grade, the same grade as the users, won't provide the pressure, so there will be a booster skid in there. Very similar to the evergreen booster skid that we have. Very reliable and will provide the adequate water supply and pressure to the community.
Tyrone, we just have a question from
Yeah.
Director Grenier.
How many users are on this system?
Walshing has around 40 as well. Yeah. So this is what the current area looks like. You can see the fire truck beside the garage, and then the two buildings at the end of that of Barclay Street there are the old chlorination building and the newer filtration building. So basically, we've done the survey and geotech investigation on that parcel where the fire truck and garage are. And we have a revised cost estimate in our capital plan from capital budget from last year. We were looking at 1.19, but revised is about 1.35 million to do this reservoir. So to fund this, we would be looking at splitting it 50-50 between the Growing Communities Fund and the Community Works Fund, or Canada Community, CCBF. Yeah. Basically our growing communities and our gas tax funding there. So we anticipate taking a report to the board to the next board meeting, not tomorrow's, but the one after, with this funding request. So as far as this funding goes, there was, for this Growing Communities Fund, a report to the board back in June of 2023, laying out I think it was just over $5 million that was provided to the TNRD for Growing Communities Fund, and that staff would identify projects that were eligible for this. The Walshing Reservoir was in that report as one of the potential projects, as well as other departments' projects as well. So we would be bringing a report for accessing that funding for this.
Go ahead.
I've got a question about some of the financing on that. Should I raise that now or bring it up later?
I don't see why we
Yeah,
wouldn't
we can
discuss
speak
it
to
now,
it
yeah.
now.
Okay, so with 40 users and that $1,350,000 cost, that's $33,750 per user, which seems like a lot of money per household. So I see that we've got two fund sources, and I take it that the area director has got a share, and the area director would decide whether they would want to apply their funds to that sort of thing. So do we have enough funds available to do this if that director wanted to do that?
Yes, we've had discussions with the area director about allocating gas tax funding towards that, the CCBF funding that has been confirmed. And what we're working on right now is a report that will be recommending using Community Works Fund to top that up for the whole project to be completed.
So thinking about some of the future projects, in my case, the Savona Water Treatment Plant, which is an enormous amount of money, and we've talked about residents maybe coming to the table for a share of the capital costs of that. Have you thought about whether in this case or any other case where we might say, okay, that's a lot of money per household. Would you folks be interested in coming to the table with X dollars? I'll just throw a number out, a third. If you said to somebody, would you come to the table with a third, would they want to do that or not? And I'm not thinking about this project in particular. I'm just thinking about the precedent of spending $33,750 per household when I apply it to something like the Savona one or any other one. Should we be looking in our bag of tricks about not just funding from grant monies, but also going back to people to see if they value the system as much as we are spending?
I'll answer that, and then I know the area director wants to jump in as well. I guess the short answer is yes, we always consider where the money's coming from and whether or not there's a willingness or interest or ability of the community to pay into it. And the other thing we consider is whether there's already capital that the community members are paying for. So in this case, they still are paying for capital costs related to water main upgrades, I believe it was. Yeah, or sorry, the intake project that was replaced not too long ago, less than a decade ago. So each specific site, we always are each a system, and we're gonna be looking at that of what makes sense, and then working with the area director who's got, you know, the best sense of what the community wants and is willing to do. And then ultimately, based on those discussions and often consultation with the community, then we'll go to the board to recommend it, ultimately up to the board to say, go back and ask the community for money or approve the proposed funding model. So I think this is good discussion, and that's why we bring it to the committee before it's going to go to the board for these kind of debates or discussions.
Thanks. I've got a question and then I've got a comment. So the question would be where you're looking at putting the reservoir. That is a lot that I think is some kind of zoning that kind of implies fire protection. There's something I've remembered from talking to the residents that is specifically set aside for that. So is anything going to be required in terms of any kind of rezoning? Are we good?
We don't know yet. Short answer is good question. We're actually looking into that right now to figure out exactly what's required. There's 2 parcels there. So that's still in the works.
Okay. And second, Wallace Sheen is paying one of the highest water rates right now. We didn't raise water rates as much as we likely should have, simply because the community can't afford it. The reservoir that is up there right now is near where there is a ballast mine, I guess for lack of a better term, operated by CP Rail. It has a kind of a membrane, for, again, lack of a better term, because I'm not the most technical, so forgive me for this, but it has kind of like a floating cover on the reservoir. The reservoir is not treated. It is dangerous. It's dangerous for our staff when they're up there if somebody happened to be blowing up the mountain for this ballast. This reservoir is long overdue, and we need to look after all of our residents in the TNRD, regardless of the size of their water system. We made a commitment, and I think we really need to honor that commitment, and we definitely need to protect our staff as well. Thank you.
All right, that's that was it for the big significant projects. The rest, I mean, $22 million doesn't seem insignificant, I guess. For our 5-year plan. This will be revised shortly with our budget season here and be put out to a 10-year capital. So you can see on here that, for instance, we have the 1.19 that we had forecasted for the Walsheen Reservoir as a project for 2025. That is one that we are hoping to move forward with, and we've had to inflate that or increase that budget number due to inflation. I mentioned multiple times the Blue River water main replacement. So we have $200,000 that's funded through reserves. The Blue River Community Water System Reserve specifically, not any other water system reserve or general reserves. So when you see reserve funding mechanism on here, it's from that Community Water Systems Reserve, which is funded by the parcel tax and the user fees from that community water system. So we do have the multiple CWS reserves and CCBF for disinfection and water quality analyzers. Those are the couple items Quinn was mentioning before about standardizing our analyzers throughout our utilities, as well as our dosing, our sodium hypochlorite or chlorine dosing pumps skids. So those are already funded and are in the works. The Spence's Bridge, I'll just touch on that. We did have a line item already for rehab and a new pump for Spence's Bridge for one of the wells. So during that event in July, we looked at doing an emergency well rehab. And turns out that more investigation, manual investigation of our well levels resulted in a incorrect span on a well level sensor. So essentially the sensor thought it was 4 meters lower than it was, causing a bunch of issues. We are still doing work with our hydrogeologists through our, well, the CEPF program to do that, but we do anticipate rehabilitating one of the wells and replacing the one pump that is definitely worn in Spence's Bridge this year. Then we have the Walshing Reservoir. Then we have some other items here. So for Paul Lake, a treatment plant, I mean, we have the RBC there that is based on timelines and asset management practices. However, that I expect to get pushed out. We have for lack of a better term, a placeholder for a Savinaw water treatment plant of $11.5 million in here to basically show like we need this money to build these facilities. It's the funding for that is from a grant. There's no way to get 100% funding from the residents for that, whether it's through increased rates or asking them for borrowing. That's my opinion on that one. But and so yeah, a bunch of these will get adjusted annually as we update the capital plans and as funding comes through. But these will be essentially guiding our requests for grants and stuff, this 5-year capital plan and these items on here. So, yeah.
And if I could just add to that, and this is kind of a narrative you're going to be hearing throughout budget season here in the coming months. So just if you're wondering why we include these items in the capital plan that don't have funding, it's to make sure we're identifying that these are planned, but they are also not funded. So it gives us the ability to show that they're in the plan and that we have this issue, and shows the greater need when we're applying for grants. Also to show the need to the whole board that these are all projects in the capital plan that the board is approving when they adopt the capital plan, showing that those are a priority to have those projects in place. And just the other comment is that, you know, this is just kind of a teaser snapshot here. So this is going, the full capital plan, full draft capital plan is going to be going to the board in November. And then the plan is for it to be proposed for adopting the capital plan in December of this year. And just to reiterate what Tyrone said, I know many of you are looking at the dates here. The dates are, for some of the projects that aren't funded, are somewhat arbitrary because we don't know when grant funding may become available. So if a grant fund becomes available, for example, that could fund 100% of the Savinaw one that we want to apply for next year, then we would, every year we revisit the capital plan, we could move where that is in the capital plan. So don't get hung up so much on dates with the ones that are grant funded. It's more the fact that we want to recognize those are in here as a priority. The ones that are funded from reserve, those ones indicate that, as Tyrone said, the money is there and those are planned for on that date.
Okay, I see Director Sau.
Thank you, Chair. To Mr. Vieira, I understand we already discussed this over email, but you know, with the new information you were sharing, I just wanted to see if I have my understanding correctly. So if like these items will have like basically a staff time priority, not necessarily funding, but at least they're ratified by the board to say these are. So if I see a system or a project within my area that's not on there, so would I be correct in understanding? So it is like a less priority in terms of staff time than, for example, the Vavenbeek water treatments. Thank you.
So, I mean, the Vavenby water treatment facility, the preliminary design is complete. It's a shelf-ready project. It's not on here yet. I think it's further on. We forecasted it further on down the road on this. So we put together the 10-year plan and then take the 5-year snapshot. And this is just a summary I pulled from the 5 years of the 10-year. So it's like an excerpt of an excerpt. Just for some high-level highlights, but Vavenby would be on there further down the road. So if As far as applying for the grants as well, not every grant stream is going to, like, there's unlikely to be a grant stream that comes out that would accommodate both a Vavenby and a Savinaw application. So perhaps like they're looking at a $6 million cap on a project, right? They'll tell you that in the guidance with the grant projects that would exclude a Savinaw application. If there's one that has a $20 million cap per project, that would, include a Savinaw. So you just have to look at the grant programs that are coming out, and Vavenby would be on the 10-year plan as well. So when that's where Jamie was saying the year doesn't really matter that much. This is just a 5-year snapshot from our approved capital plan. So you'd have to go back to the approved budget and the 10-year capital plan and see where Vavenby was on, or is that on that? Maybe I confused you more. I don't know.
Yeah. So Vavenby is in the capital plan. It's just not in the 5-year. Correct, but that is a good comment that, I mean, I think in the 10-year plan, we have captured all the projects that are essentially on our, I hate to call it this, but on the wish list of need to be done to get the systems upgraded. So if there's something that's not on the full 10-year plan that is needed, then yeah, we would adjust that, correct that. So, and this is the current capital plan. It's going to be updated for when it goes to the board in next month for the 2025 capital plan.
Okay, thank you, Director Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification, when you're talking about Spence's Bridge, the well pump and well rehab, you did one this year, and now one of the wells, if I have that emergency basis?
Sorry, we did not need to do the emergency well rehab
Oh,
in
okay.
Spence's Bridge because the issue ended up being a faulty level
The
transmitter.
sensor.
So we will continue on with our regularly scheduled programming of doing a well
Okay,
pump
I
replacement
got the
and rehab.
sensor, and then
Yes.
I thought that you'd already done emergency rehab
No.
on one. So we only have the one pump that's going to be
Replaced.
require the maintenance replacement, whatever it is
Yes.
currently, and the other two are okay?
Yes. So,
Okay.
and some of the updates that Quinn mentioned we'd done on the programming. Previously, we had well pump number 3 was the lead pump and would run 24/7, 250 days of the year.
Okay,
That's the pump that we're going to replace because it is worn out. It pumps around 5 liters per second. Well pump 2, which is the exact same size as that pump, pumps about 6.2 liters per second, which was the design flow for those pumps. So we know that we've seen a 20% reduction in capacity on that pump itself from just, wear and tear. That one's identified to be replaced. That's part of our capital planning and our asset renewals. Is these things are near the end of their life, let's replace them and rehab that well while we trip the pump out or pull the pump out of the hole. So that's what the 5-year and 10-year plan had, was to do that normal routine asset renewal replacement, not the emergency one. The thought at the time in July was that we could take this, we already had approved funding for it. We could do basically a short notice rehab on that well if we needed to, and we didn't need to.
you didn't need to. Okay, thank you. Just trying to clarify.
Okay, Tyrone, do you have anything else? That's it. Just a blank screen. Okay, so we'll move on to item 5.3, small water system treatment.
All right, thank you, Chair. So we've been kind of foreshadowing the guy sitting behind us, and so I'll formally introduce him. So Liam, you can join us at the table if you want. This is Liam Baker. He is our lead engineer with True Consulting, who has been working with us for quite a few years on many of our projects. So I've invited him here to give us a bit of a background, if you will, refresher on small water system treatment. So, we geek out on these meetings talking about all the different water systems and what we're doing for capital upgrades and operational costs and operational treatments. But we're also talking about grant funding for new projects that we want to see happen, water treatment plant that's on track here in Pritchard and, many that are on our wish list. But I want him to kind of talk about really what goes into these projects in terms of planning, budgeting, engineering, because there's more than just for example, the ticket cost of the guts of a water treatment plant. That's just a small component of it. We have engineering costs, we have land acquisitions, all part of the process. So I don't want to steer all of Liam's thunder because he has all of those things built in his presentation to really walk us through it. So I think it'd be really beneficial for this committee to be sort of reminded about that process. So a little background on Liam. So he's a professional engineer, 15 years experience, and he's in the consulting world now, but he also has experience with local government. So he was the utilities engineer with the city of Kamloops before he went to True Engineering. And at the city of Kamloops, he helped plan and manage water and sanitary sewer system upgrades and provide operational support in emergency response. And Liam says he particularly enjoys working with small communities and small water systems on upgrade projects. And so we have a great relationship with him and True Consulting. And just a reminder, we've switched about 2 years ago with how we do our engineering and consulting services. We used to do procurement one-off for specific capital projects and hire an engineer for that project to run the project. 2 years ago, we did a request for proposal to enter into a contract with a single firm to do all of our utilities engineering. So we have kind of consistency from projects to projects, and then the engineers we work with is familiar with all the systems, so we can kind of hit the ground running when we have a new project. So with that, I will turn it over to Liam.
Thank you, Jamie, or Mr. Vieira, I suppose, formal setting here. I am very excited to be here. I will take any opportunity I can to talk to people about utilities infrastructure. So any questions you might have, we'll be happy to address. I do disagree with Mr. McCabe on one thing. I also am excited about contractor procurement and NRFPs. So, well, he said he was less interested in them. It is a pretty critical part of our process. And it's a coincidence that I'm talking to you about this today, but the Pritchard project is also closing today. And so yeah, big day for us, and hopefully it all goes well. I've been working on that project for upwards of a couple of years now. So also happy to see other excellent city of Kamloops employees here. So good group always. Bonus points for anyone that can get the pop culture reference for my slide title here for the presentation. It's a little bit not that obvious, but yeah, thank you. I tested that out before. I got crickets before, so. Basically today I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the preamble on like what raw water is, because that is really what leads us to certain treatment technologies. We'll also talk about water quality and why there's a need to treat it. And that should lead us into a discussion about the types of treatment technologies that are out there. Ultimately, we've been looking more and more recently at this ultrafiltration treatment technology. I'll explain why a little bit, and actually have some of the filter technologies right here. This one's actually from the city of Kamloops plant, some of the filter tubes. So we can pass that around as well. I will kind of go through what a project workflow looks like. These systems are fairly complex and they do take a fair amount of effort. I think the TNRD has been working on the Pritchard project for 5+ years just to get it to this point. There are approvals necessary and a fair amount of detail that goes into this type of stuff. And then finally, we'll talk about costs. We struggle with the costs probably just as much as this group might and other municipalities might. It's a difficult battle, and we can talk a little bit about where the costs come from, what parts of the infrastructure result in what kind of costs for the upgrades, and then also some of the inflationary difficulties that we've had in recent times. Obviously happy to answer questions. I've structured it to hold questions till the end, but always happy to have a discussion. So yeah, raw water, this is usually where you start, right? You're looking at what water is available to any given community. I believe everyone in this room has a water system in their area. Usually you start by trying to find out where there's a quantity of water available. So that's raw, untreated water, and then also try to get the best quality of water you can out of either the ground or the surface. That's a good starting point because it can limit some of the costs further down the line. Withdrawing water from either a well or a surface source requires licensing with the province, and so they provide water licenses for allocations from both those sources. Groundwater wells are typically preferred as a source initially because they can result in cleaner raw water. Surface waters will tend to have a lot more turbidity in them and be a little bit cloudy. I mean, you see the rivers as you kind of drive by them and stuff. If you're pulling water out of, in particular, the North Thompson, you end up with some kind of worse raw water quality. Groundwater wells can be either confined or unconfined. So if they're unconfined, it means they're can be influenced by contaminants from the surface. So usually we try to shoot for confined ones that are a little bit safer. They can come with their own challenges. So they'll have contaminants in them like iron and manganese is a typical thing for groundwater that requires removal. Iron and manganese until recently was only considered a aesthetic thing. So, you know, it smells kind of funny when it comes out of the tap. It will stain your toilets brown and are rusty colored if you have prolonged use. Recently, it's actually shifted to become regulated as having a maximum allowable concentration. We call it a MAC. And that is because it has an impact on infants and small kids. So until recently, you know, it didn't really seem like it had much for health impacts. And then the guidelines for Canadian drinking water kind of reevaluated that. More science became available that illustrated that this stuff can have an impact on infants in particular and developmental abilities of those individuals. So it's become a bit more of a focus recently. The thing with groundwater wells is there's a lot of uncertainty there. You know, if we could pick our raw water source, it would typically be a groundwater well, but you don't always know what you're going to get before you start actually drilling exploratory wells and other things. So there's a lot of uncertainty upfront on how much it might cost, whether you're going to get enough water, what the water quality might be like, and how deep the well has to be. If that type of clean groundwater source isn't available, we often look at things like surface water sources. A good portion of the TNRD's water systems are supplied by surface water, so rivers, streams, and lakes. They typically have higher turbidity concentrations. So turbidity is basically suspended solids in the water because it's water running down the hills and through the creeks and into the rivers and stuff like that. You tend to have some of that in the water. Raw water always comes with varying physical and chemical properties. So each raw water source is different and requires a different level of attention or treatment. One of the main roles that Interior Health has in water systems is regulating construction permits and operating permits for the systems. So when we look at providing water to a community, Interior Health publishes what they call the 43210 objective. Bit of a handy way to remember what you're trying to achieve. But the science behind it is basically that you're trying to remove 4 logs, that's 99.99% reduction of viruses, 3 log reduction of Giardia, which is basically beaver fever is the common name for that, and Cryptosporidium protozoa. 2 methods of treatment, so there's some redundancy. If one happens to fail, then you have some backup available. 1 NTU or lower turbidity, which is, like I said, the cloudiness, some of the suspended solids in the water. The reason you're trying to lower that to 1 NTU or less is because that is where bacteria and viruses tend to attach themselves. So they'll kind of hang on to their turbidity. And if you know you have high turbidity, there's a higher likelihood of having contaminants in the water. And then 0 detectable E. coli and fecal coliforms. Everyone knows about E. coli after Walkerton, I guess, 30 some odd years ago now, but certainly not what you want in your water system. And the other guiding document out there that we reference often with water quality is the Canadian guidelines for Canadian drinking water quality. It's a very exhaustive list of all the potential contaminants, everything from arsenic, lead, the bacteriological or microbiological components like E. coli or fecal coliforms. It basically outlines what your aesthetic objective would be for every potential component of the water, as well as if there's any maximum allowable concentrations that are safe for human consumption. There's also radiological ones as well. They're often not as focused around here, but we could go through it in exhaustive detail, but there's about 200 items on that list, so we might skip that. So really the goal is to try to filter or clean up that raw water to the point where it's safe for human consumption via those 2 guidelines that exist. There are several different technologies that are around, everything from simple and cheap to complex and expensive. They all have different benefits and drawbacks. The simplest one that we often see around here are things like cartridge filtration, which you have in Wallachine and I believe a couple other places. They're better for really small scale systems, so very small systems under, say, 50 residents. And they filter the water down to about a 1 micron size. So 1 micron is one thousandth of a millimeter. The problem with these are that they don't always meet IHA requirements by themselves. A lot of bacteria and viruses are actually smaller than 1 micron, so it can't always filter that out. They are fairly operation and maintenance intensive, and they only work if your raw water doesn't have a high amount of turbidity. If, you know, basically, as anybody knows with a filter, you're pulling water through it. So anything that you're filtering out will stay on outside the filters. They, if you have a really high turbidity in the raw water, you tend to cake up your filters quite quickly, and it becomes a real maintenance headache. They don't often have an automatic backwash cycle, and so they have to be manually changed or cleaned. And we found at Paul Lake via the campground, for example, they tried this system out and it was difficult, and they ended up moving away from it entirely. It's very good for lower turbidity. So if you're not going to, you know, cause problems with the filtration mechanism, then it's better for that. It has a generally lower capital cost. So it's kind of offset that with some of the operation and maintenance challenges that they might have with them. So that's on the simpler side of what kind of treatment we might see. I call this one conventional, but it can also be like mixed media filtration, where you basically have vessels that have different media in it. Usually it's a sand or an anthracite or a granular activated carbon that basically filters out the water in the same way that a membrane filtration plant might, but it existed as a technology much before membrane filtration. So it was often used, you know, it's still used, but it was often used even more so up until 2005, 2010, that kind of timeline, because it was the technology that was available, is generally affordable. It does take up quite a bit larger space. It can be generally fairly expensive. And it does also have operational challenges. It requires a bit of front end work to do some pilot testing to make sure the type of media that you'd like to use will actually do the job. And it requires backwashing in the same way that a membrane filtration plant might. It's generally used for larger scale systems, 50+ residences kind of thing, all the way up to, you know, hundreds of thousands of residences. The one we'll talk about a little bit more today is the membrane filtration. And the reason this has become more common is that the costs, well, several reasons, but the costs of those systems have decreased a lot in the last 10, 15 years. It's basically, these ones are hollow fiber membranes that have very tiny pores along the side of it. So down to 0.0205, 0.05 microns. So small enough that you can get water through it, but you filter out virtually all the contaminants. I'll just pass these around. They're kind of fun. If you're in my line of work anyways. This is the ones that are in the city council. And these ones are used for, let's see, thousands. But they're used in a lot of smaller treatment plants. So water will flow basically from the outside of those tubes into the tubes and then down the middle of them. And so that's how the filtration mechanism works. So all the contaminants, the solids and everything are held on the outside of that tube. And then when you backwash it, you basically push water through it backwards. Yeah. No, that has to come back with me. So when you backwash, you basically push water backwards through it to blow out all the solids and clean the filter. It requires a pretty low level filtration or pressure to kind of push water through it, but it is extremely effective at pulling turbidity and bacteria and things like that out of the water. It doesn't catch all the viruses, which we'll talk about a little bit. That's oftentimes why you might need UV or chlorination afterwards, is to make sure you're neutralizing that type of thing. But it's very good. It's fairly stable to operate. And it's just a very good mechanism that can remove almost everything you might need to. And it's very good for surface water sources too, where you have seasonal variation in turbidity. It can handle really low levels of turbidity to very high levels of turbidity. This is, so obviously on the right is the ultrafiltration tubes that you have in front of you. On the left is the plant in Clinton that has a very similar system to this Paul system that you have on the table. So those long tubes are where all of the ultrafiltration tubes live, and basically water flows, like I said, outside those little tubes back in and out. And then the rest of the equipment is some of the support equipment that we'll talk about a little. This is the mechanism for treating the water, but there is a huge amount of work and infrastructure that's required to make sure that the rest of the processes work and you can actually build a plant. We've already talked a little bit about this. The filtration mechanism does require backwashing, so up to about 5% of the water we call reject water. I think the city of Kamloops has their backwash very low by now, just through, it was like less than 1% last time I talked to them. But just through experience, you can kind of reduce the amount of backwashing that's required. You learn how to operate your plant and optimize it, and it can be very efficient. You do need to periodically clean the membrane filtration system with chemicals, and the filters can last 12 to 15 years. It does depend on the raw water quality, how it's operated. City Kamloops, I think we're in that range, maybe even a little bit longer. They've got really good success with their filters there. And it meets IHA's 3 log removal rule. So it basically contributes to all of IHA's 43210 guidelines. Doesn't meet the 4 log removal of viruses, but that's typically why you might need things like chlorination or UV. This is what we call a process flow diagram. I'm not going to go through it all in detail. This is actually for the Pritchard plant. What I've highlighted in red there is the filtration skids and system. The rest of the equipment is all support equipment. So if you started at the lower left where it says South Thompson River, that's basically where we pull it's a schematic to show how we actually produce that clean water. That's the South Thompson River where we pull in raw water. It gets pumped into the plant through storage tanks and mixing tanks, through the membrane filtration system with a bunch of different chemical skids that provide different, do different things, and then into sort of like a treated water clear well with treated water pumps that pump back into the system and provide that clean water to the system. So I just put this up there to illustrate, obviously the filtration system's the most important part of a treatment plant or treatment system, but it's by no means the only part. This is the plan view of our Pritchard design, actually. Same thing. This is the building itself. There's a ton of stuff in there, lots of different pumps, lots of different skids, compressors even to help with control of the system. In red is the actual filtration skids. So you can see it's maybe 15 or 20% of the entire area is dedicated for those, and the rest is for all the other processes that we need. Some of the ancillary treatment options or treatment systems that we often will see, if you have high iron and manganese, you might need a specific filter like a green sand filter that can remove that iron and manganese. Also, there's sometimes activated carbon or otherwise that can help remove some of the color you might see in water. Coagulation is a thing we sometimes put upstream of filtration, where you add chemicals to the raw water so that instead of very fine particles, it basically binds all the fine particles together into larger particles, makes it easier to filter out. Sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. And then chlorination and ultraviolet treatment are mechanisms you see fairly regularly because it allows you to meet the second treatment barrier of that IHA 43210. So the filters will be the first barrier, first treatment methodology, and then the chlorine or UV will be the second. Chlorination is very common because we also usually want a residual chlorine level in your system to make sure if anything ever gets into your system, there's a little bit of chlorine in there to sterilize and clean up that water. So we've talked a little bit about it, and I think Mr. McCabe alluded to the amount of time that we've been working on that Pritchard system. A typical workflow for this type of thing can last up to 5 years, depending on the complexity. The first step is usually identifying that need. So the TNRD has done that already for all the water systems by virtue of doing a water system master plan. So every water system in the TNRD has a fairly recent one. A lot of those master plans will basically say, you can, you might need to treat your water, but you might want to actually go try to drill a well or something to that effect. So usually those master plans are used to set the stage and identify the needs of the system over the 10, 20, 30-year period. After that, once that need is identified, it will typically undertake some preliminary design and pilot testing. So we'll look at the raw water quality, we'll look at the flows necessary going through the plant, and come up with a preliminary budget and cost to build a certain type of plant. Usually that's when we'll select the treatment technology. In a lot of cases these days, it is membrane technology because of the lowering of that cost a little bit and the ease of operation and maintenance. For a year afterwards, year 2 to 3, we would typically do detailed design. So designing the plant, working with our sub-consultants to do building designs, electrical designs, civil and engineering designs, and the plant itself. And then once that's complete, we'll typically, we have to apply for an IHA construction permit. IHA has the right and responsibility to approve these works. Their mandate is to ensure the communities are getting that clean drinking water and try to reduce the risk of boil water notices and otherwise. So they'll review sometimes in exhaustive detail the designs that we complete before they provide a construction permit for the works. Just for context on the Pritchard project, we've been working with IHA since last October, basically trying to get them information as we go, make sure they're comfortable with the design. So we're approaching about a year working with IHA to try to make sure they're comfortable with the design and the system. We believe that approval is coming imminently, but we'll see. And then after that, usually depending on the size, it could take a year for construction, sometimes a little bit more. City of Kamloops plant obviously is much larger than any of the TNRD systems, but it probably took 3 or 4 years type of thing to build. It produces, I think, 160 million liters a day, up to that much. So quite a lot of water. Everyone, of course, always asks about the costs, and understandably so. I created this graph from sort of recent projects over the last, say, 4 or 5 years. Obviously, cost can be influenced by a lot of different things, but a typical cost based on the capacity of a plant is illustrated there. You can see on the low end, it's hard to build treatment plants for, under a couple $1 million just because you're building buildings, civil works, all the electrical works, and you have to procure the equipment. Most equipment manufacturers have sort of stock size skids that they produce. And so there is a minimum size that makes sense to build a membrane filtration plant on. But that comes with a cost, a minimum cost. And these days that seems to be around the $1.5 to $2 million range. I threw some communities in the TNRD on there just to kind of illustrate where they might fit based on the capacity needs that they have. These are surface water communities, some that, I talked to the TNRD about future treatment plans and other things for. So you do get better value as the size goes up, but obviously that doesn't come entirely without a cost. So on the small size, I know Paul Lake's not a TNRD system at this point, but we put it on there to kind of illustrate where one of the smaller systems might sit. And we have Delaware, Avon, B. Pritchard, and on the high end, Savannah. Savannah's got a fair amount of water demand at it, and obviously costs would be higher because of that. I talk mostly about capital costs, but there are other costs that the TNRD will be thinking about as they go through this. There's operation and maintenance costs, and there's life cycle and renewal costs. As I mentioned, the filter units and the actual media will require replacement occasionally. It's hard to know entirely if that's 8 to 10 years out or 15 plus years out until you start operating and looking at how it's working. But there is a cost associated with that. This I put on there. This is the Industrial Price Product Index in Canada since 2010. We included this to kind of illustrate what has happened to costs for this type of equipment since 2020. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that things went a little bit haywire on that time, 2020, 21, with supply chain issues. Up until then, we were finding a pretty steady, 2% a year increase in costs, what you might expect to match inflation. In 2020, you can see And it's all regularized to a January 1st, 2020 cost index of 100. That's how the PPI works. But you can see basically a 40%-ish increase over the course of a year or two in costs that might be related to water treatment plant equipment. We saw this on piping and civil works as well, but maybe not quite to the same extent. So when I talk about the difficulties that we have as in an effort to support the TNRD and other clients on how to present these costs, this is also what we struggle with. It has been difficult to try to design and construct things in an affordable way since 2020. Costs have leveled off a little bit. The index might suggest they've gone down, but it's hard to ask suppliers to reduce their costs. So that can be sometimes difficult. But this is just for context to kind of show what has happened over the last few years. And this, for any given treatment plant, like I mentioned, there's a cost associated with purchasing the equipment and the actual filtration units, but there's plenty of other costs associated with other things. And so this is a breakdown of kind of a regular split that you might see. Of course, it'll vary based on site-specific conditions every time, but in theory and in general, you're spending about 18 to 20% on the actual treatment equipment itself, about the same on the building and the foundation. Building and foundation costs are generally fairly extensive. Electrical systems and controls, obviously, the systems won't run without that type of thing. Power supply, variable frequency drives for pumps, other things. The mechanical piping and pumps tend to be about 8 to 10%. Heating, ventilation, and plumbing for the building is lower, but still a cost at about 6%. Civil works can be, to run pipes to the plant and back, and upgrade supply pumps elsewhere can be upwards of 10%. And then engineering can be, 15% of the cost just for that effort. And that's all I have. That's a fair amount of info, reasonably technical, but hopefully not too technical. And like I said, I'll answer any questions and could sit here for hours if you would like.
Thank you very much for that offer of sitting here for hours, but I think we will decline. So I have Director Grenier, Director Sau, Director Houghton. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple questions. The first is your raw water starting turbidity. What's your target for raw water?
The target treated water is always under 1 NTU.
No, the before treated.
Oh, it tends to vary, and that varies over the course of the year too. So in the South Thompson River, it can vary between say 4 and 20, but we often design these systems to be able to accommodate extreme peaks. So if there's say a landslide upstream or something that washes turbidity into the river, you can have turbidity upwards of 100, 200 NTU. So a lot of the time we'll spec filter systems that can handle that turbidity load for a short period of time. Obviously you wouldn't want to run a plant, well you could, but you would run the filters into the ground a little bit if you tried to filter more of that water. Plus at some point, a filtration system requires so much backwashing to push the solids back that you start to lose, more than 5%, you start to lose the value of the production of that water. But yeah, it totally varies based on the source. The Thompson rivers can vary between, 2, 3 NTU upwards of 20 regularly.
And then I gather that the deeper you go in the source, it's not always the case, but generally the case that the turbidity drops if your water intake can be taken further out. So part of the cost savings might be not so much filtering high turbidity raw water, but filtering low turbidity raw water, which reduces this cost, increases the cost of the water intake, but that's usually a lot lower cost. So I guess I'm asking these questions because related to the Savinaw cost at $11 million, if we could reduce that number down by taking the water intake further out, is that a reasonable approach to getting this elephant shrunk down?
Certainly it helps. I mean, you still do have to you still have to meet that 43210 criteria. The city of Kelowna. So I guess to answer your first question, yep, coming in from lower down in a lake will often allow for cleaner raw water. The city of Kelowna, for example, has what's called a filtration deferral. So they have proven through fairly extensive exercises in source water protection plans that they have such low turbidity in their source water from the lake that they don't need filters. So that is possible. You have to get your raw water consistently well below that limit. And I can't remember the turbidity levels of the raw water in Savona now. I don't know if Tyrone, hey? Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I guess to answer the question, it can be a thing, but unless you can get it to be really low, you still likely would need some filtration.
And then supplementary to that, it appears that you prefer this over a sedimentary system. Your chart suggested that this does a better job cleaning water and I guess maybe even less maintenance because a sedimentary system requires quite a bit of backwash where, I don't know the frequency, but
Yeah.
this looks like a static type thing where the other one is a very mechanical.
It is a little bit more mechanical. It is a little more active to operate. And you do need to be very deliberate about the media that you're using. As far as the building and the process goes, they're not like a conventional system or a sand filtration system is not necessarily smaller. So as far as needing, a certain size building and electrical support and other things, the costs are not going to be that much different. The specific cost for the treatment skids might be a little bit different, might be a little bit less because the technology's been around for quite a while. And it's not really that technologically complex. It's basically just sand or different gradations of sand that sit in a vessel that you push water through. So I guess to answer your question, it can be a little bit cheaper, but you do still need all that support equipment to make them run.
So on a per liter basis, is this more efficient or more expensive?
Both. It'll be, I guess when you ask about efficiency, you're asking about financial.
Well, it's more
efficiency,
efficient, but I guess
yeah.
on a per liter basis, is this more expensive or less expensive than the sedimentary system?
Typically mildly more expensive.
Mildly.
Yeah.
So this would be the go-to in virtually every case then. If it does a better job, it's about the same price.
Yeah.
All
These
right.
days, that is the case. Like when the city of Kamloops built their plant, that was one of the first membrane filtration plants around. So it was kind of a bit of a case study. I think they had a deal with the supplier of the Z-weed systems as well at the time to kind of trial some of their equipment because it was so new. Since then, the cost of this membrane technology has kept going down.
And is this Z-weed or is this something else?
The ball one's not, the Z-weed is a proprietary one that the city of Kamloops uses. Is it Veolia that has, I don't know, Z-weed. There's a bunch of different manufacturers, but the technology is basically all the
So
same.
the costs come down.
Absolutely.
So if we looked at this as part of our solution for the unbuilt systems, this is kind of the direction that you would be recommending to our staff?
Oftentimes, yes. It is very predictable. It creates very predictable treated water qualities as well at a very predictable flow rate. And so that's partly why, and I mean, Mr. McCabe and others can talk to the operations of these systems. They're more of the experts in that realm, but they typically be a little bit more bomb-proof, so to speak, for operation and maintenance. So yeah, that it is moving in that direction. 15 years ago, that was not the case.
Thank you.
If I can add to one comment about the operational costs, in the world, in the reality where we're needing to rely on grants for the capital projects, we always want to consider trying to get the most, how do I put this, most efficient, best technology that we can afford because we're also struggling on operational costs. So in terms of funding the labor maintenance required on these systems, if we can reduce the labor and maintenance by spending a little bit more on the capital upfront, that goes a long way because, as you know, even capital costs aside, we're challenged to fund the maintenance of these systems.
Okay, thank you, Director Sal.
Thank you, Chair. Two question. The those membrane filtration systems, would they work for fuel spit? Like if for the North Thompson, for example, Vavenby, we've had stop order usages because of fuel spillage from MVIs. That probably won't do very good if we got gasoline flowing through it.
Those
It
will
will?
filter out.
Oh,
In
okay.
fact, the pore size is so small that it would filter out like fuel vapors even,
Oh,
which
okay.
is kind of amazing to me
Yeah.
as well. But when I was at the city, when they had a reasonably small fuel spill upstream of the intake on the South Thompson, and I get why there's some concern. You wouldn't want to run fuel through those constantly. But basically the messaging from the city at the time was like, there's no reason to be concerned about the treated water. It will filter out that contaminant.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And then the second question is talking about the operating cost. How much, actually, this might be a more of a question to our staff. How much like coordination, bargaining, bulk buying with other, municipalities and regional districts do we do in BC? Like, I would imagine if we can combine buying those membranes with CRD, CS, there might be some cost benefits. I'm not sure how much efforts we spend on that.
So I can answer that. I think questions related to capital projects and bulk buying with capital projects. In that case, the answer is no, we don't. Because really each project is independent. We don't, like, someone knocked on our door, for example, saying we want to go in on buying a treatment technologies. Unless we actually have one budget for that year, there's no way we can put out millions of dollars.
Okay, Director Houghton.
Where do you see regional districts? What direction are we going to be heading in these ultra small water systems like Del Oro and others that are 50 minus down lower to meet requirements of health and also financial requirements? Is there affordable technology out there that we could go after to treat these ultra small water systems, or are they just cost prohibitive?
I can certainly answer that from my perspective. We struggle with it. We understand that there are limitations for these small communities, and we often look at some of the other treatment technologies first. We did a review for the Paul Waterworks system, which I understand is not your system at this point, but we looked at the simpler ones first. And then we'll also look at alternative sources a lot of times before we commit to this type of plant. Like if you can get a clean drinking water well, like groundwater well system, that is often where you can save a lot of your money. And the TNRD systems have recently been, some of them moving in that direction because of that. It can be difficult to sit in front of an audience like this, to be in all honesty, and talk about the costs related to upgrades for very small systems, because as that price graph that I showed you kind of demonstrates, there's a low end on the costs that is still a fairly significant cost outlay. And so that's primarily why a lot of small municipalities will end up relying on grants mainly for this type of thing. Try to get a good, robust, and steady water treatment system in place so that it can be operated efficiently after that. I suspect the TNRD is not in much of a different position in that respect, but I would defer to the experts here for that.
I would just kind of echo that comment and just a reminder for the committee, we have specific systems where we've done that, just that is moved away from surface water and went to groundwater for that reason, because we get better quality water and reduced treatment costs. So we did that in Spence's Bridge 15 years ago, 10 years ago, before Tyrone's time, before my time even, but right around that time. Where we converted from a surface water to groundwater, and that's when we upgraded the whole system to partner with the band. And then most recently in Black Pines, where we had an intake in the North Thompson, and we essentially have abandoned that and have brand new groundwater well with better quality water and way lower treatment costs. Like Black Pines is the perfect example. we originally, we as the TNRD, like, again, before our time here, but the original plan was to spend millions of dollars on a new intake and it still wouldn't have been treated. And so it was a good move that we changed direction on that and went to the groundwater. So now we're having a better source and reduced treatment costs.
Supplemental to that, at Del Oro, would we have, being that we pump it out of the South Thompson River, is there the land there close to the river and the opportunity possibly of putting in an affordable groundwater well for 43 hookups?
I know a little bit about that system. Mr. McKay might know a little bit more. We often look at the groundwater wells that exist in the area to see if they seem like they might be suitable. In that particular case, I don't believe groundwater exploration looks to be that feasible. And so we're planning on maintaining the intake and making improvements as and when possible.
So, and
Fair, Tyrone?
I'll jump in and Tyrone may add to this as well, but I guess generally speaking, especially with these old systems, we find that the developer, when the properties were originally developed, put in a water system because there was no groundwater. And so now 30, 40, 50 years later, we're saying, well, can we put groundwater? And then we realize that was probably why it was put on a system in the first place and not on wells.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you very much, Liam, for coming in and sharing some of your expertise with this committee. It's appreciated and your time is appreciated.
Thank you.
Is there any more new business to add? Okay, oh, yeah, Director Grenier.
I'd just like to point out that we've made strides on our presentations at SILGA. We then went to UBCM. We've had our resolutions adopted. We've met with the ministers yet another time. That small water utilities approach. And I think we stressed to the ministers and their staff that we would like to follow up after the election in January, February, instead of waiting around for another UBCM. And so that was an initiative to address some of these things. I think the other thing, we've heard a lot about capital costs and about different approaches. Jamie and I have a meeting coming up in Savinaw with community groups. We've kind of tested the idea that, gee, if you folks wanted to participate in some of the capital costs, maybe some of this stuff could come on sooner than waiting around for $11 million grant. That's a discussion point. The other thing that I was thinking about is that when we look at our MFA borrowing as a TNRD, 2% of the MFA borrowing is done at the electoral area level, 98% is done at the municipal level. And I'm just wondering, now that we have this wholesome understanding of our needs and we've done everything we can do on our operating costs, maybe it's time to think about whether we should, in addition to grants and aid, consider some kind of MFA borrowing so that we can kind of be the captain of our own ship. We're just waiting around right now for $11 million to fall from heaven. And the combination of going and asking people if they want to pay for some of the capital costs, along with MFA financing, along with grants, might get us to where we need to be sooner than if we just limit it down to that one thing. So that's just food for thought for this committee. I certainly want to explore that on the Savinaw thing with staff. I also want to explore, having seen the ZWeed approach, it looks like it's a better thing than the sedimentary systems. It seems like we could go universal with that, and there may be some efficiencies in that, but that's for a different meeting. Just those some observations today.
Thank you for that. Okay, is there anything else that anyone wants to bring up? No? Okay, then this meeting is adjourned. Enjoy your lunch.